morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever we find you in the TOC world today. My name is Marcia Hutchinson, and if I haven't met you, I'm the General Manager for the TOC ICO, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you here today. Before we get started, I would just a little bit of logistics. If you have questions during the session, please type them into the question box, and we will answer them at the end of the webinar. We will be providing you with a recorded version of this after via the TOC ICO website. And at the end of the session, you will also have the opportunity to raise your hand, and I can activate your link and you'll be able to talk directly to Humberto. Okay. Today's webinar, the TOC Pillars, the Foundations that Shape All of TOC, is being presented by Humberto Baptista. Humberto has a BS and an MS in computer science and an MBA. He is the CEO and founder of Vectus Solutions, a TOC consulting company. Humberto was a member of Goldratt Group, a TOC expert for Goldratt Consulting and TOC professor for Goldratt Schools, and has been involved in many projects ranging from leading viable vision projects on consumer goods and retail to functional implementations in manufacturing, projects, and services. He has led translation efforts, TOC Insights, GS Material, GWS, and CCPM in Viable Vision S&Ts. He has taught TOC Viable Vision applications to experts in logistics, project management, and sales and marketing, as well as project leaders in many countries. His current interests include TOC principles, implementations guided by strategy and tactics at advanced topics of TOC finance, TOC for retail, TOC for NPOs, including government, healthcare, and education, and TOC for education and techniques for teaching TOC. So a wide range of expertise in TOC. And now I am going to turn this over to Humberto. And thank you so much, Humberto, for being here with us today.
Thank you, Marcia. Hello, everyone. I hope you're having a good time and a good day so far. And today, I want to share with you a little bit more of a field which is of very high importance, but not well known as it should be. In the exact sciences and physics and other exact sciences, there is a recognition, although a reticent recognition, but there is a recognition that without advancing the basic research, so in physics, without going there with particle accelerators and investigating things, people have no clue what they'll be used for, at least at the time being. Without advancing the basic research, we cannot expect long-term improvement of the sciences. So once you look at things we use today, from biochemistry, biology, physics, and many other areas, these were research made in very abstract and non-practical areas, very basic areas a while ago. Sometimes centuries ago, sometimes a few years back, and then they became practical applications, and they became tools and machines and things we use on our daily lives. The same thing goes with TOC. TOC is a science. Its structure is very similar to the exact sciences, and without checking the basic part of the science itself, without advancing basic research, only relying on application can take us only so far. We need to go back to the roots, to the sources of TOC, and understand it deeper and understand it wider, as we want to bring more and more benefits from it. So if you want the process of ongoing improvement, our famous PUGI in TOC, depends on us revisiting the basic research, the basic assumptions and basis for all of TOC. For the lack of better words, we call these bases the pillars, the things that sustain and underpin all of the theory of constraints and allow it to grow further and further. So we have here a brief agenda for this presentation. I'll touch a little bit of the history of the pillars, why we have 5 pillars and which are the 5 pillars. And I'll draw brief parallels between the pillars and other parts as I speak, but I ask you to think about them. As Eli would say, go and learn, but base yourself, base whatever you're doing with TOC, whatever you're considering doing with TOC, on these pillars and see how it measures up. So how are you well-rooted, well-based or not, and the things that make TOC, TOC. So the history of the pillars and the concepts that underlie all the theory of constraints begin even before the name theory of constraints, back in the 80s with the OPT principles. These OPT principles, for those who don't know them, are an interesting parallel drawn in the time that Eli had a software company dedicated to making software to allow people to run companies and specifically industries better. And these principles, they were called the OPT principles. Right? These were principles that allowed people to run the flow of products, the flow of work better. But they were very close to rules like recipes and warnings. Okay, these are useful, but they're not as easy to use as a basis to draw conclusions and advance thinking further on. Then came other works, especially from Eli Goldratt, but some other thinkers also chimed in, like the Race, essays on the theory of constraints. Eli then proposed a very interesting and one of the most important tools ever in TOC, which are the focusing steps, the 5 focusing steps laid out in the goal, right? And then he started showing, demonstrating how these could be applied in the satellite series, and then in the insights and so forth. In the satellite series, it's the first mention that Eli makes of principles of TOC. But basically, the principles he names are 2 principles that are common scientific principles for the exact sciences, and I'll go back to them. And he implies the existence of a 3rd one, which is a crucial one, which distinguishes TOC from the exact sciences, right? Exact sciences do not deal with people, they deal with things. And there's a crucial difference there that if we leave unaddressed, will render our thinking, will render our actions, will render our theories much, much less effective and very, very poor. In a series which is called Beyond the Goal, Eli tries for the first time to lay out a roadmap for not only convincing companies to get on board with TOC, but laying out how they should do it. What are the steps? How should we convince people? How should we build consensus and momentum for the implementation to move forward? And he raised an interesting observations there, and among them, technology-based principle, which was very interesting, but it's a specific principle, does not necessarily underpins everything in TOC, but if you go back to see it, it's there. And in the necessary and sufficient series, Eli rounds up a little bit more, expands a little bit on the principles, but the first time he really lays out what he considered to be the whole list of principles, he goes and does that in the choice. In this book, Eli is making an interesting argument. He goes about trying to prove that to think like he does, it doesn't require a genius. It requires someone who works hard and with determination on training his own mind. And the book lays out, especially if you get the 2nd edition, lays out the 4 pillars of TOC there. Eli then moved on, and unfortunately he died before he could complete the science of management. And in the science of management, he left for us the introduction of this book. And the introduction lists another of the pillars that was not listed in the choice. Okay, it's a very interesting pillar as well. I'm going to present it. Other people like Alan Bernard already tried to gather these principles in a more explicit and actionable way. So if you did the Odyssey program with Alan on the last few years, you might have seen that. And this is something that anybody who goes deep down in TOC will encounter, these 5 pillars. So without further ado, let's go and look at what drives the principles. So Eli was tempted and challenged to give us a definition of what is TOC, and driving from some ancient tales and knowledge, he decided to go on a very brief definition of TOC. If you read the Theory of Constraints handbook, in the introduction, Eli does a beautiful job on summarizing TOC's history and giving his view of what should be a definition of TOC. And he gave us one word, so it's hard to be more succinct than that. He gave us the word focus. And focus is great as a summary, but it doesn't help us very much into deciding and discovering what to do with it. So to have focus is to do what should be done and not to do what should not be done. So do nothing else beyond that. And obviously, after we just phrase this, the question becomes, what should be done and what shouldn't, right? And this is crucial for us to really claim that we're doing TOC or not. So the pillars are a way for us to answer those 2 questions, what should be done and what should not be done, okay? The critical pillar in TOC is simplicity. And both the first 2 pillars, simplicity and consistency, and please notice, these words I used to capture the name of the pillars are my own view of a name. So just for us to refer to them in a more practical way, I gave them these words. Eli sometimes used that. So the 3rd pillar, Eli named it quite often using this word. Eli Goldratt also used the name inherent simplicity, okay? And people are good and other phrases to describe the pillars. If you see these first 2 are a direct and acknowledged inheritance from Newton. Isaac Newton, when he gave a speech on the acceptance of the chair, he was named to and was announcing his major work, his grand work, the Mathematica Principia, the principles of natural sciences. He said these 2 principles, okay? And then Eli brings a very interesting principle, which I think it's quite unique to TOC. We call it the respect, or people are good. And that was phrased, but not as a principle, in the satellite program and necessary and sufficient series as well. But he gives its whole body in the book, The Choice. Variability it's a principle, it's a pillar underpinning TOC from the OPT times, but we never named it as such, okay? And something that came from the total quality movement, came from many areas. We use it a lot. There is absolutely no TOC application that does not rely heavily on this pillar. And Eli managed to mention it in his last days in the introduction to the book Science of Management. Also, there is the 5th pillar, one that Eli pushed a lot in his final time, which is the change, or never say I know. That was laid out also in the book The Choice, in the process standing on the shoulders of giants, and so forth. Let's check each one of them in turn. Newton's Principia does have this phrase brought to us. And it's natura valde simplex et sibi consona, meaning that nature is very simple, so it's exceedingly simple, and harmonious. Consona means sounds good, sounds with, so it's harmonious with itself. So what Newton's trying to say here is the two first principles of TOC. The first one is nature values, or is very simple, so it's simplicity. And secondly, that nature is harmonious with itself, so it's consistent. So there comes consistency. Let's check each one of them in detail. Simplicity, it's something that Eli Goldratt tried to hammer in our heads from early days on, which is the more complex the problem, the simpler the solution must be. Okay, this principle, this pillar, it's not only a cornerstone of TOC, it's a cornerstone of humanity. If you want to be called a human person, you have to deal with very, very complex environments. And in complex environments, we, in our limited capacity, cannot sustain, sometimes we cannot even start to deal with these with complex tools. Okay, the more complex the tool, the more it takes a toll in our capacity to understand what we're doing with it. And we do have a limited capacity. Our grandparents did, and what their grandparents did. So we need each time more tools and a way of thinking that bring us to this concept that we need to have simple solutions for complex problems. We cannot have any other type of solutions and expect them to work. And TOC is one of the areas and one of the fields of knowledge that is trying to make this way of the way to manage human organization, which are just by nature very complex. So you need something simple to run them. If you want to run them successfully in one way or another, you have to do it with simple solutions. It doesn't matter if you want to call it TOC or not. You cannot escape simplicity if you want to get any degree of success. So where does it come from? Well, the first one to verbalize was Newton, but it's not the first one to be aware of it and use it. And it's based on several important concepts in the human knowledge. The first one is the exponential statistical distributions, the ones that were made famous by Pareto. Second, it's based on strongly connected systems, systems that are very linked, or the parts of the system are very linked among themselves. Also, there is a very interesting concept that doctors and people from the medical profession use a lot in the process called anamnesis, which is causes converge. Okay, so when you try to address several effects, the more effects of one phenomena you have, the less causes this phenomena may have. That is, causes converge, and I'll explain exactly why in a second. And also, there is another very important origin, one of the oldest origins in TOC, which is the flow capacity. Flow capacity in dependent systems, so systems where things go from one part to another in sequence, and if they don't pass to the previous parts, they cannot go to the posterior parts, then this system, the flow capacity in this system, is dominated by a few, or usually one, of their elements' capacity. And when you have statistical variable systems, so systems where the capacity of the elements vary, this is much, much more critical. So strongly connected systems, as I mentioned, were some of the first illustrations Eli did to bring us to think about what is complexity? What is something complex? And he gave us the example, the famous example of system A and system B, and asked which one is more complex. And it's a very interesting discussion because there are two ways of looking at complexity. One is the complexity to describe systems. So if you just look at the pictures, system B, it's much easier to describe than system A. So if you take the description approach, system B is simpler than system A. But if you're trying to act upon the systems, to manage them, to cause an impact, to influence the systems, then system A has less points that will influence the whole than system B. To influence the whole of system B, basically you have to go through each box, 4 boxes, you have to touch them all. In system A, if you hit the box in the bottom, it does have these arrows which signify some cause and effect relationships, and the effects of touching the box in the bottom will touch all the boxes, will influence and cause effects rippling up to all the other boxes in the system. So in terms of management, in terms of influence, system A, it's much simpler than system B. That was what Eli called, and it's called until today, the inherent simplicity of a system. The more connections in the system, and human connections, you know, are very numerous. Any organization has a huge number of known and unknown connections. The more connections a system has, the less points of influence you need to touch the whole system. So to influence the whole system, it's much simpler, not necessarily easy, but much simpler than a system which is totally disconnected like system B, right? And in terms of jargon, in physics and mathematics, we say that the more connections among the system, the strongly connected systems, the more connected the system is, the few degrees of freedom. So the less dimensions or the less variables that are needed to explain the whole systems. And therefore, the less points you need to control the whole system. There's also exponential statistical distributions. When you have more independent phenomena, they usually follow a power law, an exponential distribution. That's to say, when I have many things happening without a strong connection amongst themselves, but they're similar phenomena. Let's say, I don't know, how much money people have in a specific city, or each people, I mean, or for instance, the yield of the pea pods in a plantation of peas, and things like that, which are somewhat connected. Yes, people are people, and they live in the same city, and they work in the same circles of business. The pea pods are planted in the same terrain with the same illumination and so forth, but the connection, the cause and effect between one and another is very weak. So if a plant of peas grows stronger in one corner of the terrain, it has almost zero impact on another corner, another plant growing another corner. In the case of wealth and money, you have a little bit more influence, but it's not exactly very strong. In this case, a minority of the elements determine the majority of the effects, and that was translated and named as Pareto principle, that 20% of the causes dictate 80% of the effects. And you can see here an illustration of that. So this 20% top causes here are responsible for 80% of this area of the curve, which is 80% of the effects combined. And this is true in many, many areas. And it's a nice and quick focusing principle. One of the main thinkers and applier of this principle in TOC, it's Boaz Ronen, Professor Boaz Ronen. He introduced many TOC tools which are based in this principle, and they allow a good degree of simplification of the complex system. Causes converge. When you go through a consultation with a doctor and you have some problem, he uses a process known as anamnesis. The anamnesis is it's a process of listing effects, listing symptoms. So if you go in and say, doctor, I have a high fever, and he'll tell you, okay, what else, right? He will not give you anything just because you're running a high temperature there. He needs more, right? And why does he need more? Because once you say, oh, I have a fever, I have a high temperature, then many causes can explain that, right? So if I go here and say, oh, I have this problem, he can think of a number of causes of that. And then you say, oh, give me more. And okay, I will. And sorry, just trying to get back here. So, and then he goes and say, give me more, tell me another symptom. And you give him another symptom. And he thinks, ooh, so now he's telling me his joints are aching. These can have a number of other causes, but some of them are common to the two. Others are not. So something can explain why I have a high temperature, but does not cause my joints to ache. And something can cause my joints to ache, but not cause a high temperature. And he keeps asking you that. Give him more symptoms. And you give him more symptoms until you reach a point that just one of the speculated causes may explain all the effects. If he's a good doctor, he'll test that. He'll ask for some tests and exams, but he has a very good understanding and say, okay, this is probably the cause. And the more effects you have, the less causes are likely to have produced them. If you just go about that with speculation of people with good intuition, good knowledge of the field, it will converge the causes that explain your situations quite rapidly and probably just hit one in very short time. And finally, one of the most well-known principles that is used, sometimes not named, but used in TOC applications, is the flow being dominated by a few elements capacity, right? The flow capacity, so how much goes through the whole system, it's dominated by a few elements capacity. So when you have dependent processes with finite resources, right, then one of them is going to be slower than the others. You can call them Herbie, you can call them the weakest link, you can call them the bottleneck, leverage point, choking point, constraint, you name it. It's just to signify that that point determines the maximum flow rate of the system, right? Variability introduces a new dimension to that because it enhances the effect. So it's even more pronounced, the effect of one element dominating the whole flow. And sometimes it masks the average capacity. It's the variability itself, the most variable point itself that that determines the whole flow capacity, or the points that suffers the more variability, depending how you look at it. That is the one that determines the maximum flow capacity of the system. Obviously, when you change the mix of the flow, etc., things can change, and they sometimes do, but the simplicity is always there. Okay, I remind you of the sand clock effect. So you can change whatever you put in a sand clock. It can be sand, can be little balls of iron, it can be a lot of things, as long as they go through the bottleneck there, which is in the middle, so it's a middle neck. Then you have what? You have the same type of flow, right? And it doesn't matter if the change of the mix shift the weakest link. It's gonna still have one or very few weak links. So the idea of simplifying complex flows through discovering and then extracting benefit from the weakest link is valid whenever you have a dependent process flow. Second, we come to consistency. So Eddie was very concerned about being able to get results, get benefits from his ideas and from TOC ideas, as we see in the exact sciences. So in the exact sciences, what we do see is that they work progressively and cumulatively. So you build on top of others. In exact sciences, you don't have revolutions, you don't have evolutions. You have a third type of thing, which is a consistent accumulation of knowledge. So even when a scientist, it's said to invalidate or prove wrong another scientist, his works are not in vain. Much on the contrary, you understand where to use them much better. So when we had Einstein proving Newton wrong, right? Newton's work suddenly was not worthless. It's still very valid and still used with great success. And we know where to apply it. We know the limits of this work. What Einstein did and what science does when you have advances is to expand the reach, to expand the cases that the theory can deal with. So what Einstein did with the general theory of relativity was to include very things very far from our reality in the theory, and allow us to understand a number of things we couldn't understand before because they were not covered by the Newtonian theory. So in this sense, it's both a revolution and an evolution, because it derives things from the Newtonian ideas, which is an evolution. It does not make them useless. And on the other hand, it changes basic assumptions. It changes fundamental ideas in the theory. So in this sense, it's a revolution, but it's neither, right? It's something better. It's an evolution with consistency. It's a consistent improvement of ideas. And consistency is the only thing that allows it. If you have conflicting theories, if you have theories that say opposite things, there is no way of building a very solid building on top of them, okay? If you try to put an edifice on top of theories that contradict themselves, this will not be very stable. They will crumble very easily. This is why, for instance, in physics, people are so obsessed, and I think with a good cause, with a unified theory. Nowadays, quantum theory and modern relativity, they do not see eye to eye. There are several parts of the theory which contradicts one another. So one theory says one thing, the other says another thing. And until they merge together, we cannot build successfully on top of both. So we are limited to the fields of application of one and another. And we have a lot of trouble when these fields are intersecting, because we don't know which theory will work. And there are fields which are outside of both that we cannot reach. So in this case, the conflicting theories are limiting our advance significantly. So if we want to have a good chance of improving what we do for the long run, we need to fight for consistency. And consistency it's a tricky thing, because human beings are capable of handling inconsistent thoughts, right? So we can think of things that are opposite in our mind at the same time. The problem is to mix them with fact. So to think about something a lot sometimes tricks you into thinking that you are dealing with reality. In your mind, you only deal with thoughts. And some thoughts cannot exist in reality. And dilemmas, inconsistency, conflicts, they do not exist in reality. So that's a problem if you mix the two. If you think this is a reflection of reality, you're going to have a hard time modeling reality and building a theory that really can deal with reality. So the skills and the ability we have to handle inconsistent thoughts has to be weighted carefully, and we must remind ourselves that this is something that it's a bonus as long as we remember that it's only in our heads, okay? Until we resolve, until we evaporate the inconsistency, it lives only in our heads, never in reality. It will never be a reflection of reality. And even if we try to handle a lot of inconsistent thoughts, our minds will not be glad about it. These things take a lot of energy, and they are not very good in our cognitive processes. So we can handle them, but a few, and not for very long. And each time we solve an inconsistency, we can better utilize our minds and better build theories. So a limited resource, an important limited resource like our minds, it's wasted by handling too many inconsistencies. Each one you solve gives you more room and more power to use our mind. The third principle for me was a game changer, and I think for TOC as well. Until now, everything I said is applicable both to TOC and to any exact sciences, physics, chemistry, biochemistry, and so forth. All these sciences use the simplicity and consistency principles. But the object of their study is very different from TOC. TOC concerns itself with people, and it's basically a people-oriented science. What is the crucial difference between people and everything else that we look at in the universe so far? Well, if I have to summarize it, I would summarize it in one word, and I would say intent. People have intentions. They think of doing something. They want to achieve something. They have something driving their actions, which is not a physical or chemical process in itself. It's a little bit more than that. It's an emerging process. It's a cognitive process, right? So they have an intention behind what they do. Sometimes the low level reaction, and that is very physical and chemical, but sometimes we have higher in terms of cognitive complexity level intentions. And these intentions drive our behavior, our perception, our thinking as well. And this differentiates us from other types of things that we might study in the universe. So atoms and enzymes and planets, they don't have intentions. That's not something that applies to them, but applies very much to humans. So if you want to understand the behavior of humans, how humans go about doing things and how they react when environments and conditions change, you have to take account of their intentions, right? And Eli used to phrase it in a very Goldratt-esque form, which is people are not stupid, even when they do stupid things, right? Nice, and does really give a display of Eli's own sense of humor. But then later on, he wanted to drive it deeper. And he arrived at this verbalization, which is people are good, even when they do bad things. And later on, we stuck with the people are good, period. Which is an interesting thing. This is not a statement of fact. This is not an attempt to say, oh, everybody is good, period. This is genetic. This is unavoidable. Well, first of all, good is a concept. So there are areas where someone might think that's good and other people might think that's bad, and you have a problem of definition here. But even if we got around that, being good or bad might be something of a characteristic of people. But the question is not that. The question Eli wanted to answer is, what is a major limitation on the way we think about people in order to be able to handle these relationships, to deal with people better, okay? And then he came with this idea. To say people are good, it's not a statement of their nature. This is a working assumption. It's an assumption that we believe it's true, not to make a claim on the nature of people, but to force us into a certain behavior, which is to ask why something was done instead of who did it, okay? So what is the wrong assumption idea behind a bad behavior instead of, well, who is the wrong person behind that bad behavior? Looking a little bit deeper, the principle of respect, or people are good, implies a complete avoidance of blaming and labeling of people, because labeling and blaming basically blinds you to what's going on inside people's heads. Sometimes you cannot really understand what's there, but if you label, it's basically a guarantee that you'll stop looking and you'll stop trying to discover what's there. And once you stop looking, well, the chances of discovery drops dramatically. So the idea, it's a complete respect for everyone. Doesn't matter what they do. Sometimes what they do, it's quite ugly. But the respect implies respect for everyone. It implies another thing. And Eli was very, very mischievous in this way, which is a distrust of any idea. Doesn't matter who brought it. Oh, maybe even Edison's ideas. I don't know. Any idea, it's up for checking and up for challenging. So it's a complete distrust of any idea and a disrespect for any idea in potential. So you do not trust ideas, you trust people. Obviously, you don't trust people to do the right thing always, because that's not what we're saying. We're saying that people sometimes do very bad things, but not because they're bad. If you take to heart this assumption, you basically not think about who they are. You think what they were thinking, what drove them to that bad behavior, and not what they are. Because frankly speaking, we have little power and little influence on what people are. But we have a decent degree of influence on how they behave and what are the drivers of their behavior. Sometimes it's not a big influence, sometimes it's a huge influence, but it's much, much bigger than trying to change the basic physical existence of some people. So we don't know how to genetically change a personality, but we know how to change an environment, how to change a measurement, how to change ideas sometimes of other people. So once we see bad consequences, we have these two roads, right? We have one cause, which is, oh, people have bad ideas, and that lead to bad consequences. Another one is people are bad. Well, if we believe people are good, and that's our working assumption, it's not a statement of reality, it's a working assumption, then these have an interesting consequence. These say, okay, if people are good, then people may have bad ideas, because we're just saying that the nature, the composition, what people are is good, not their ideas. Ideas is something we do with our mind. So people can have bad ideas. And at the same time, we're saying, no, we cannot say people are bad. So we eliminate this avenue and leave our focus only centered in the bad ideas, okay? So we understand people better. And what about exceptions? Sometimes we see people doing awful things. I mean, really awful things. I do not need to give you any example. The moment I said the words people are good, you thought of many counterexamples, I'm pretty sure. Pick any, okay? If these are exceptions, should you treat them as such? Should you say, oh, most people are good? Definitely not. Why? Because if you go with the idea that some people may be bad, so most people are good, there are exceptions, psychopaths, I don't know, then we remember that bad means bad consequences. So I have to check people, okay? Because I'm afraid that bad consequences may be bad for me or people and things I care. So if those labeled bad are beyond redemption, why? Because it's in their nature, right? It's something we cannot and they cannot change, and I have to check people. Then I don't really try to understand bad people, because there's no point, right? They are what they are. It's just a matter of avoiding them, blocking them up, or I don't know, getting rid of them in any shape or form. And if I don't try to understand bad people, I have less chance of stopping or minimizing bad consequences in the future, because you don't know what triggers them. You don't know where they came from, right? And that's why we should have complete and utter disrespect for thoughts and respect for people. So all people are good. It doesn't matter how psychopathic and how crazy and how bad they are, because if we think this way, we'll understand them. We'll not forgive them. We'll not embrace them. We'll not accept bad actions. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that we'll be driven to understand them deeply. And by understanding them, we can not only preventing these things from happening, but sometimes helping people think differently as well. Okay, even if they are driven by some biochemical imperative, we might find environments where they don't do damage. On the opposite, where they might be useful, and so forth. And also, if I have to check people constantly to see which category I'm putting them on, I'm using my limited capacity in labeling instead of understanding. And remember, the brain is a finite and limited and scarce resource. So that's your mind you're wasting on this. And if you get these two guys together, I have less chance of stopping and minimizing bad consequences in the future. And I use my limited capacity in labeling instead of understanding people. Then I have to check more and more people. And I have this bad feedback loop right there for you to suffer from. Let me give you an example. And that's a very dear example. For me, it was done by my own daughter. And a couple of years ago, she discovered she was celiac. And celiac disease is a disease that makes you very ill when you eat gluten. Okay, with gluten, your body reacts in a very bad way and starts to attack itself. Okay, and it hurts her intestines and it makes her growing up hard if she eats gluten. So what happened was she went back to school and started saying, "Oh, I cannot eat gluten." Her colleagues will label her fussy, and you know how children go, conflicts would flourish. Okay, sometimes verbally, sometimes not. And harmony was not exactly the first word that I will use to describe what happened there. Suddenly, what we can conclude for this? Well, as a father, my heart goes out for my daughter, and I say, well, her colleagues are labeling her fussy because they are idiots, right? Why would they treat a serious disease, something that will basically harm her growing and harm her body and eventually leads to cancer and other stuff, unchecked and really not take it seriously? So what should we do? Should she get new colleagues? Should she fight them? Should she do nothing and suffer? What's the way, right? Well, there's another way to do it, and she did it on her own without her father telling her about the TOC pillars or anything. So sometimes her colleagues have some wrong idea, and that's where her intuition, she never verbalized it this way, but that's how I understood it. And the idea that I understand it is that the media and everything kids see, and they see a lot these days, is saturated with fashion things, fads that go out and in so quickly we cannot even check them. And one of these many fads fall into the diet subcategory of fad and fashion, right? So you have these diets coming up and down and getting in and out of fashion so quickly that people are kind of saturated by them. Kids are no exception, right? And they know these are fashion, these are fads. They instinctively know these things are not that serious, right? And among these fashion diets, there is a gluten-free one. It's not a diet for people who are sick. It's something that they think might help them. And frankly, I have serious doubts if that will help them, okay? But some people, which are not trying to do any type of diet of the fashion, etc., do have a disease and they cannot eat gluten. And when people mix the two, well, you can see in the yellow part of my logical twig there, the consequences are not very good. But if she takes that into account, she says different things to her colleagues. She goes about saying, oh, if I eat gluten, my intestines will inflame and bleed. And obviously she uses more colorful descriptions of the consequences. You can imagine children now with 12 years. And she describes it quite vividly. And when the other kids listen to that, they go, wow, it's a hint of admiration for all this crazy phenomena going around, and they help her check those tiny letters in the food labels and etc., and much less conflicts come about. So this for you is a working example of the respect principle, okay? The fourth pillar, this pillar is very interesting, it's very important to TOC and many other areas, and we just verbalized it and just had at least Eli Goldratt verbalizing it on the very recently and very close to his death, which is variability. This is a pillar and a principle taken directly from TQM. So Total Quality Movement used this, but used this in a very limited area. I think it's much more applicable than they thought. And the principle goes about in the following way. If you react to noise, which is normal variations in your environment, then what you do is you increase the variability, you increase the variations. So the fear of unknown, the fear of not knowing everything that's around us, and frankly, we'll never know everything that's around us, drive us to create even more sophisticated solutions and techniques and methods to understand all the one is the great jump. It's the great benefit that this principle brings to us. So how does it work? Well, there is the funnel experiment. So, and it's very famous and very well known. I'll not give you that because it's gonna be repetition for some of you. Let me give you a different one. Some of my clients and friends live in parts of the country where they love target practice. They go about doing these festivals of seeing who shoots better with those pellet guns and stuff like that. And once they drag me down there, and I shoot not very good, and this is what I got. Okay, they treat well the foreigner trying to adopt their ways and customs, and then my mind goes reeling and say, what should I do, right? And the first answer normally we get is, oh, I should correct my shots. I should look at each shot and perhaps point the gun in the opposite direction. So each one of those should move the nozzle and the aim of my gun to the opposite direction. That should help my shooting, right? Well, in fact, not. Why? Because each shot has an area where I can hit. And once I start moving the aim outside of the center of the target, I expand the area where the shots can be distributed. So I increase the variability when I was thinking of reducing it. Why? Because I changed something which is inherent to the gun itself. It's a normal variation of the gun itself. It's what usually called the noise, right? And I try to optimize my shooting within the noise. Okay. If there's a bias, if there's a bunch of shots to one side, then obviously I should move the whole thing to the other side. But once they're spread around evenly around the center, there's nothing more I can do without changing something in the gun itself. Okay. And that it's translated as working procedures, something we call the buffer management, right? So here I have some signal, something going on, and sometimes I am afraid the signal will go up too much and I don't have ways to handle it, or down and I'll deplete it of something important. When should I take action? Okay, if I go and take action on each up and down, I'll go crazy and I'll waste probably some other limited resource. Least of all, but probably the most important, is my personal attention, right? And that will be wasted because not all these ups and downs have meaning. They're just something inherent to the system. So what I need to do is to draw a region, an area of noise. This is the normal variation, stuff I'm okay with. So it doesn't matter if I'm upper end or lower end of this dotted area, I'm fine with it, okay? The problem is when I go outside the area, and that gives us focus, okay? Because I say, okay, what's in the noise? I don't treat, I don't deal with it, I don't change it, I don't go trying to improve it in any sort of way. But what's above, I go trying to act, maybe to try to capitalize better on this upswing or something like that. And what's here, I try to understand what happened, try to avoid it, trying to make a mitigation plan or a plan B or something like that. But it reduced the number of opportunities for me to act to a very, very limited number of opportunities. Okay, and if I keep updating this zone of noise and tuning what I do with the ways, with the points that get out of this zone, I have much more effectiveness. And that's the variability principle. And the good thing is that most of the time it tells us to do not act on these things. Don't act here. And that gives us much more focus because it frees us our limited resources. And finally, the fifth pillar, the never say I know. It's the change pillar. Well, another way of putting it is that the stronger the base, the higher the next jump. And that was an interesting way of Eli telling us the following. Each time you try to achieve more, if your base is strong, and please notice, I'm emphasizing strong, not big, okay, or wide, it's just strong. If your base is strong, then the next jump should be higher than what you did before. So you're ready for an exponential growth. But if your base is just wide or soft in any way, it's not solid enough, then when you try to jump, most of your energy would be wasted by the instability of the base. One of the reasons for that we already covered is the inconsistency, right? If your base is inconsistent, then it will shake with a lot of things. It will be not solid and not strong enough for you to jump higher. So your jumps are going to be each time smaller, and that's one of the main explanations for the diminishing returns effect. And more than that, when we talk about change, and change here is our attempt to improve, okay? Because improvements are changes. Changes are not necessarily improvements. And that's the reason why people resist change, right? Because they know the vast majority of changes are not going to yield good results. They're just changes, right? While some of them might be good, so we call them improvements, the others are not. But if we don't try to change, we don't try to improve, life will do something about it for us, right? Change is not optional. So the attempt to improve is not optional. And if we do a good job, we have a high chance of success, a high chance of turning changes into improvements, okay? Change is not optional for three reasons. First is environments change. The second one is that solutions, successful solutions tend to be used more and more. So we speed up their use. And once we do that, they turn obsolete quite fast. And frankly speaking, there's a third one, which is not to be taken lightly, which is our minds hate boredom. They cannot stand sameness. If something stays the same for too long, we start to get itch of doing something different. Our brains are not very good, are not wired to treat homogeneity for a long time. We start to see some other things, we disconnect our minds from that phenomena. That is something critical for us. And we need to establish a process of growth, a process of improvement that is continuous. It's not just having continuous improvement, because that may be due to luck or some other factors. It's to have a process of ongoing improvement. That is the subtitle of the goal, and that is something we still struggle to make widespread today. While you can see a lot of cases of TOC bringing phenomenal value to many environments, once you look for PUGI cases, then the number drops a lot. We have very few cases of long-lived PUGI processes in place and operating in companies. Okay, I'll treat more of that in my my presentation, the next conference, the TOC ICO 2018 conference. But this is very crucial for us. Let me dive a little bit more into these three elements here. First of all, why did Eli Goldratt said never say I know? Because he was afraid of this self-fulfilling prophecy of saying I know, and then if you know, why should you bother to learn more or to change your ideas? So if we incorporate the respect principles, that mean we should be wary and we should be very suspicious of all ideas, including our own. So say I know It's the opposite of that. We need to challenge our ideas from time to time, okay? At least in order not to block further thinking, okay? And by the way, if you try to say, I don't know, you fall into the same trap. And the stronger the base, the higher the next jump. So if you have a strong base and you use the simplicity principle, then you can try to build a process of exponential growth, okay? Why? Because when you have a strong base, not only the constraint, the leverage point it's well situated. You have the rest, the other elements, the non-constraints solidly in place. And when you grow, the problem is not getting more out of the constraint. It's having the rest of the system to keep up, okay? That's the meaning of stronger the base. It's a strong connection and a strong utilization of the whole system, okay? And the protective capacity that is needed to sustain the growth. Also, let's go back a little bit and say why change is not option. So when environments change, what we used to do may have some of its basic assumptions challenged. So I had, for instance, I was reading about Ford and his success, and his environment was based on a huge finished goods product scarcity, okay? That's why comes the legend of you can have any car as long as it's black, because he didn't have time to go and try to address each type of need of the market. He just needed to go and pump out as many cars as he could for a huge scarcity of finished goods. And in that era, many rules and mechanisms that were developed were very successful because of this assumption. When that changed, these solutions started to be not as effective, or sometimes it just crumbled, right? So they have to go back and change things. Also, when we do something successfully, we try to do it more and more. And what went right in, I don't know, something running at 10 kilometers per hour may not work properly at 100, and definitely not at 1,000. So each time we speed up, we may have to check our assumptions, because some of them are dependent on the magnitude of the speed we're going. Okay, Eli Goldratt used to say, each time you jump an order of magnitude in any variable, you have to recheck your assumptions. Okay, there's a huge chance some of them may have become invalid. And as I already told you, human minds are really, really averse to sameness. So what is TOC, right? And that's a very big question. Eli told us TOC can be defined by one word, focus. But if you had to build a checklist, am I doing TOC or not? Is this new thing, new software, new idea, new methodology, you name it, TOC or not? Is this something important that will yield good results with low investment and less efforts? Is this TOC or not? Well, you have a simple checklist. You have to check 5 boxes. Is this something that simplifies complex problems? Is this something that obeys the simplicity problem? Is this something with internal consistency? Okay, it does not have contradictions in itself. It's something that respects people, does not blame them, label them, or assign to people problems instead of assigning to thoughts and ideas the problems. Is this something that deals with variability? Can we really relax when things are in the noise? Do we know when we are in the noise? And 5, is this something that addresses changes explicitly? So it does have a process of change and change mindset embedded. It's not just something that it's brought from external pressure. That changes is triggered constantly as an obligation instead of an opportunity or something that we are forced to do from time to time. If we go in these 5 areas and you check these 5 check boxes, then you can say, without regard to the label or the name of the thing you're looking at, that you're doing TOC. Well, thank you very much. I think we have some time for questions here.
Okay, we have a couple of submitted, at least one. Hold on, let me separate this out. Okay, this is a question. Before I start, if you have questions now, please click in the hand icon on your screen, and I can open the mic for you to ask directly. But we'll start first with the written from Milan Gupta. Can you share how we can get the introduction to the chapter left by Eli Goldratt on science of management?
Well, I believe, but that's something I've heard from Eli himself, that he put this into public domain. Personally, if you need it, just write to me. I'll send you a copy. I have his permission to do so. So I don't have his permission to put it up on our site. But I believe if you cannot find it in a Google search, it's probably because it's not very well linked, and it should be on a website. Eli said himself that he wanted this to be public domain. But as that was towards the ends of his days, probably he didn't get around to defining a specific way to put that in public domain. If you need it, just write to me. I'll send you a copy.
Okay, from Brian Wells. Does improvement necessarily equal change?
Very good question. And the answer is yes. But the reason why I said it's a very good question is the following. The change might be or might not be initiated by the people benefiting from the improvements. What do I mean is the following. If you're living within an organization and something improved, you might have a cause that is a different course of action, different ways of doing things internally, or you have different conditions outside of this organization that allow it to improve. So something changed, right? But maybe it's something you did change. Maybe it's something you received and some effect of something other persons or other things did that you received that resulted in this change and then in the improvement. So improvements always imply change, but not always imply change done by the actors themselves.
Okay, this is from Richard Zaltner. If variability is a basic principle, why don't we use statistical methods in TOC?
Great question, great question. And the reason is the following. What is TOC? If the definition of Eli holds, so if we are right in saying that TOC is focus, then we need the least amount of tools to deliver the largest amount of results. And what are the results TOC is looking for, right? It's not only a bottom line results, it's not only a numeric organization-wide results. The main results TOC looks for are new behaviors. So you look at people, they're behaving in a certain way. This way, it's limiting the performance either of their lives or their organizations. So we want to change these behaviors. And if statistics is the simpler way to get there, well, please do go with statistics, right? And if you have simpler ways or simpler ways of telling them, even if it's the statistic is done by a computer, but then you translate it in something more actionable and more practical or more visible for them, go with that as well. For instance, we do use statistics in dynamic buffer management, right? The dynamic buffer management, when you adjust the size of the stock buffers up or down, we use an adaptive statistical method, right? Something derived from Markov chains, but simplified brutally by Eli to work in this environment. But it's a statistical model, right? It's a model that accumulates statistical variance around a zone, which is the yellow zone in the buffers. And if you accumulate too much variability, too much time or penetration, or you name it, above it or below it, then you'll change the size of the buffer. That is a statistical process. We don't go about very formal and very sophisticated statistical processes because these invite sophistication. And that goes against the first principle. We cannot really focus people when they have many complications from the systems. And sometimes we allow things to go inside TOC, and these things do harm. because people do not understand the proper assumptions that are basing their methods. So let me give you an example from a different area. In CCPM, a while ago, there was a struggle to say, how should we size the buffers in CCPM? Now it's not a matter of adapting the size of the buffer, it's a matter of calculating the initial size of the buffer. And in CCPM, there were two views. One is, let's keep it simple. Let's use the idea Eli Goldratt proposed, take half of the security you extract from the chain you are protecting with this buffer and put it in the buffer. That's it, okay? It took 10 days of protection from each individual task in this chain. Then you divide 10 by 2, you put 5 in the buffer and you go with it. Other fields said, no, wait. Projects vary too much. They have wide projects, long projects, lean projects, fat projects. You have a lot of integration points. Sometimes you have few. Sometimes you know the tasks very well. Sometimes you don't. You're losing all of that, right? And yes, frankly speaking, we are. But they say, okay, let's take a more statistical approach. Let's use the sum of the variability. The sum of the variability is the square roots of the sum of the squares of the individual variabilities, etc., etc. That's fine, right? But to use this formula, you do need one basic assumption, which is all the elements that you are summing the variability through the square roots of the sum of the squares must be independent. And frankly speaking, do we know project environments where all the tasks that are done many times in sequence are truly independent? Isn't there any covariance among them? Then the formula complicates immensely, and you get into the area of not having good enough data. But people went on and used this formula as if everything was independent and thinking that would solve all the problems. Frankly speaking, for me, it was just a bad use of their time. They could have been using the formula of take variability, sum it up, divided by 2, and that would have helped them a lot. And many times these things distract us from the goal of driving new behaviors with people. So thank you for this question.
Okay, this next one's a little long. No worries, but hold on while I read it. Okay. Eli Goldratt, and this is from Christoph Lambert. Eli Goldratt often characterized the pillars of TOC in terms of universal assumptions about reality. For instance, he verbalized the consistency pillar as there are no contradictions in reality. I recall him making an explanation at a TOC conference on why the three-cloud method should work. That is, why should we expect to be able to produce a generic cloud from 3 clouds from 3 areas of our life, or from 3 clouds from 3 silos within a company? I recall him saying that there is an additional assumption about reality that we make in using the 3-cloud method, namely, reality is self-similar or fractal. Do you recall this comment? Did he develop this idea further? Given Eli characterized it as an additional universal assumption about reality, do you think it may represent an additional pillar of TOC, or is it derivative of the simplicity pillar? What implications? There's a lot of questions. Yeah. What implications do you think this assumption has for how we approach understanding systems using TOC?
I had this conversation with Eli. It was, let me recall, I think it was 2008, and was just a twist of fortune that my master thesis was on chaos theory and fractal theory. And I was discussing this with Eli, and it was before he said this phrase. And the whole thing that underpins the 3-cloud method, it's an amnesis, right? Is that causes converge. So when you apply the 3-cloud method, basically you are converging elements of the causes, right? The common objective, the common needs, the common opposite actions, and you build a base cloud which explains better why things happen compared to just a point-like cause. And the reason Eli was thinking that this might be fractal was because there is no definitive proof that the 3-cloud method should work, right? because it takes too little. In anamnesis, each time you have many causes there, you have to get more effects to drive down causes which do not explain all of the effects and remain only with the ones that do, right? The good news about the three clouds is that when we get clouds that are sufficiently different or sufficiently away one from another, your mind fills up the gaps, right? And the discussion I had with Eli is, how does it fill up the gaps? Is it because you have a deep knowledge of an interconnected system, and then by filling up the gaps, you are thinking about all the effects that are in between each of the clouds? So in your mind, you have several clouds in your mind. You have the three ones you are trying to merge, and you have many others in the middle, which are interpolations of these three ones. And the discussion we had was, what is this method of interpolation? Is it just based on our previous experience and our accumulated knowledge, or is something else there, right? And Eli said, okay, sometimes I think it's one, sometimes I think it's the other. And that's why he was toying. And I think the best way to describe it is toying with the idea of the self-similarity in the universe. And I brought to the conversation that the fact that many phenomena, which a lot of feedback loops and a lot of interconnected things tend to go fractal, right? That is the work of Benoit Mandelbrot, and many people after him check this and confirm this, that there are many effects that are fractals. So my answer would be the following: if we have fractal phenomena in our environment of study, if we're dealing with them, and many times we are, believe me, then the tree cloud method, it's even more effective. Okay, not only this method, but other things we think, the feedback loops, the positive reinforcement loops, things like that, they behave better. Okay, notice that sometimes they're not predictable, because fractals are not always predictable. That's why they're used in chaos theory. But their structure is predictable. The way they explain things and the way they're handled is predictable. So when you use this idea of fractal structure to simplify the view of the universe, it helps, but it's not needed. If you are in a very Cartesian structured place, no fractals, just lines and squares and spheres and stuff like that, still, if you have a very strongly connected system, the three cloud method will converge, and you will find inherent simplicity through different means. Okay, so that's my answer for this very philosophical and interesting question. Thank you, Christoph.
Okay, this is from Dion Lane. I have two questions. I am an administrative worker in an office. I have a multitude of various things that I have to do on a daily basis, emails, meetings, etc. How do I go about implementing TOC? How do we go about determining the standard noise variation in our lives and at work with so much going on around us every day?
Great. So let this is two questions or one?
How do I go about implementing TOC? And the second one is, how do we go about determining the standard noise variation in our lives and at work with so many things, with so much going on around us every day?
Okay, so let me try to address both at once. I chose the order of the principles not just because it does have some historical structure, but I chose the order of the principles, and let me put back here the sequence. Because if you follow this sequence, you are increasingly becoming more effective and happier and wealthier and using more and more of TOC. Okay, so if you should start in this direction, if you look at, say, I want my life to yield more by doing less, right? And that may mean achieving more wealth, health, and happiness personally, and more of the goals of your organization. This order, it's a good enough order to go about. So you should start with simplicity. Look at things you do on a daily basis and say, in what order should I do them? Should I do them all? Is that one that once done will knock down many others? So what's the importance of each one? Should we treat them all as the same? So if you try to answer, just try to answer these questions, the impact is significant, right? It's very significant. Right? Later on, after you developed this focusing mechanism of treating different things differently, then you can go to consistency. Some methods, some metrics, some measurements, or even criteria people use in their heads sometimes tell them to do things and not to do things at the same time. So the ones that bother the most important things that you already established in the previous step, you should go and try to solve. Try to find a third way of doing them. Try to evaporate the cloud that's around this inconsistency. Do not accept it. Know that they are there, okay? And we cannot escape. We always have at least one inconsistency in our minds that will limit our growth, okay? But do not believe these are facts of life. Challenge them. After you know what's more important than what in our daily work. And when you try to challenge them, a major boost is forget about who is doing what. Forget about what. Forget about who people are. Focus on what were they thinking, what drove these behaviors, and then these three guys will take you a long way. Okay, once you hit a stage of measuring outputs or inputs that are relevant, so you went through simplicity, you cleaned up consistency, you stopped blaming people and started targeting wrong ideas, then some measurements are going to start to bother you because they will drive action and nothing will come out of it. So this is a revisiting of the simplicity principle. Variability pillar, it's like the simplicity pillar spread around time. Then you'll have the opportunity of defining the zones. Usually what's done is that we take some very simple statistical tool and look where the most of the occurrences that we are measuring fall, okay? And when you look at the distribution, you see a bulk in an area, and you make a cut, a very simple cut. It's a subjective cut where the majority of this bulk is within this range. And then you analyze and eventually take actions only on the dots that go out. And you do a loop to update that. The kind of range and the kind of loop will vary according to what kind of things you are investigating. So let me give you an example. When we are managing stock buffers, and we say, oh, I need 100 items of this particular item to protect me, to allow me to consume items without stockouts. And I divide this buffer in 3 zones. From 0 to 33, it's red, meaning I'm close to stockout. From 34 to 66, I'm in yellow, I'm okay. And from 66, 7 to 100, or even more, I'm in green, and I'm probably above what I need. And I order each time more of these items as the sum of what I have on hand and what I have on transit is below 100. After running a little bit, I say, oh, I've been too much in the red. Probably my buffer is too small, then I have to grow it. So in the same way, if I stuck too much, if I stayed too much in the green, I should reduce my buffer. And that's a parallel you can do to other things that you're controlling. If you stay too much above the range, you probably have to adjust your system to deal with that things that are above the range, eventually to include them within the range. And if you stay too much below the range, you have to do the opposite, right? And that's the dynamic buffer management applied to stocks and can be applied to other things.
Okay, the next question is from Ramakrishnan Padmanabhan. If step 1 in applying TOC is knowing the 5 pillars, what is step 2? I'm trying to understand the thinking process that can lead me to a positive change.
Okay. I would say that step one is not necessarily knowing the 5 pillars. It's a very good step. It's a very good first step. I would not go so far as to say this is the step number 1. Okay, but let's assume it is. Okay, let's assume that your first encounter with TOC was these 5 pillars. You don't even know what TOC means. You have no clue who Goldratt is and what he did. You just met someone and you read something that explained 5 assumptions, 5 interesting assumptions, and you think, wow, this might have some relevance, might have some importance to my life. Then, if this is the first step, and I'm not saying it should, but if it is, then how could you go about and trying to extract value from them? I think what we usually do in TOC in different ways, and obviously knowing an environment might make this, we might have an heuristic, an optimized approach to encountering that environment. But if you would go into an environment which you don't have any previous experience, you don't have any pre-established way of dealing with it, or you don't want to rely on any pre-established way of dealing with it, then the order that I laid the pillars is a good suggested order for you to establish a process of bringing out the humane, the TOC in this environment. So you would go about thinking about, okay, what do we want to achieve and how things are connected in my environment towards that. What helps, what stops us from getting there. And that's basically going about simplicity. Okay. Once you factor it and you drive down to the causes and you see the factors that influence more towards the goal and the ones that stop you more from getting to the goal, then you might have to start acting, right? And your action sometimes will be consistent, sometimes will not. So the first cleanup you do is trying to get out, focus where to act, and then the types of actions should be consistent. And then you go on adding other elements of the other pillars. And obviously, when you need, you go back and revisit the previous pillars and adding more of these elements to your system. So the thinking process here does not need to use the formal TOC tools or any other tools in any sense. Okay, you can use them. You could use the TOC thinking tools to go about this. So you can drive a current reality tree, and then beneath it you build a core cloud, or you can use the 3-cloud approach and then build a core cloud and then try to attack it. You're all talking about the simplicity principle here. Or you can go to a shop floor and a factory floor and choke the release and simplify the flow, and that will give also you the leverage points and the weakest link in the flow, which is also doing simplicity and so forth. So the specific tool you go about, it's less important than the assumptions we base this tool on. So as long as you're basing whatever you're doing with these 5 assumptions, you're doing good. You're doing not only TOC, but you're doing good for you and your environment and the species in general, right? And you may use things that are from TOC or from outside. I think we should not restrict ourselves. We can and should benefit from thinking from other areas. And the checklist is here, okay? Are these things thought out? If they check the 5 boxes, they're quite thought out. But some things, we sometimes miss one of the boxes, and these things may be TOC or not. Sometimes we have things in TOC, we call TOC, but they fail in respect to one of these pillars. So, well, there's a need to go back to the drawing board and improve it, right? And some things that are not TOC, people see as, I don't know, the opposite of TOC or something, may check all the 5. And this is good. So we should not be limited by the label TOC. We should go beyond it and see where it drives its strength and why is it good. And my view, and that's a historian approach that I use here, is that these 5 pillars are enough, at least to what we know now, are enough to drive our development as people, as a species, much, much farther than what we have already done now. And to wrap up your question, I think if you choose to know the 5 pillars as step 1, that's a good step. I don't know if it's necessarily the most fundamental or the only step to start your journey into TOC, but if you get there, use them in turn, right? Specifically trying to see the sequence from 1 to 5, because one builds upon the others. And whatever tools you use, try to keep them as parallel, as compatible to these 5 principles as you can.
Okay, a second question. I'm building a career in TOC project management. Can you please tell me what steps I can take?
That's a bit off topic, and I'm not so sure I'm the best person to answer that. So I'm going to give you a biased and very, very, very contaminated answer from my own experience. There are 2 ways for you to succeed in project management. There's the technical way and there's the strategic way. The technical way it's more like a good execution, a good executive, a good manager, someone who receives a task and gets the task done in a good way, in a good timing, in a good budget, without thinking or worrying too much about what the task means, right? What the project signifies or brings. So it's a guy that gets things done. Nobody asked what the things are. It's just the things are done, right? And this is the technical avenue. So if you go in this avenue, CCPM has many tools and software and thinking about it that can make you a very effective guy and can help you identify inconsistencies, complications, complexity and lack of respect and variability that plagues normal environments that are trying to execute projects. The problem with project management is not planning, it's execution. One of the greatest mistakes or misquotes of TOC, it's in the PMBOK, where they put CCPM as a scheduling process. Sorry, it's not. Okay, it might look that way for somebody who has never done it. Okay, but if you do CCPM, this is an execution process. The planning in CCPM is just the bare minimum to get the execution right. And frankly speaking, you should strive to get the bare minimum in project management. So if you go about having a successful career as a project manager in the technical side and in the executioner side, you should focus on simplifying the systems and executing them more and more effectively. The pillars help you in that. And to the other aspect of success in project management. In project management, there's another dimension. Sometimes people call that portfolio management or stuff like that, but I think it's a crucial aspect of projects, which is, what is this project doing for the surrounding organization, for the intended recipient of the project, right? Am I doing a good work in this sense? Am I bringing this beneficiary closer to his goals or not? Okay, because sometimes we do this beautiful project and frankly speaking, it connects nowhere to no place. And sometimes you do a shoddy work, but it's a big boost. It's fantastic. It brings so much value you cannot understand it, right? And when we dive too much in planning and execution, we lose sight of the importance of the project. So depending on your personal inclinations, you could pursue one type or another type of career in project management, either the technical one, the execution one, or the more strategic one, the one that thinks, what is this project for? Is it properly scoped, or are we out of what we should be doing? Is it inconsistent? Is it simple enough? Does it really take into consideration the right ideas instead of labeling just people and so forth? And then you can use the 5 principles in a different way as well to your benefit.
Okay, I believe that's it for the questions. There is a request. Could you put your email up on the screen so that they can email you to get the copy of Eli's chapter introduction?
Or any other questions you might have afterwards, or if you're watching this webinar and you have questions as well, feel free to write to me. My email's there in the last slide. I always look forward to new insights and thinking and ideas regarding the pillars and other areas of TOC, as you've heard before, but especially to the basic research, how we can evolve the engines that drive TOC and drive humanity forward more and more. So thank you very much. Thank you, Marcia and TOC SEO, for this opportunity, and thank you all that have participated in this webinar for your time. And I hope this has been productive and beneficial to you.